Well, good morning. This is the Lew Rockwell Show, and what an honor it is to have as our guest today Dr. Ron Paul. How does one introduce Ron Paul, the greatest champion of liberty, of sound money, of Austrian economics, of the ideas of freedom, the Constitution, real American history, international peace, a man who's educated literally millions of young people through his campaigns and his writings, most recently his books End the Fed and Liberty Defined. Ron, I might start with that. You know, you're always asked by people, why is it that you're so attractive to young people? Why are young people so attracted to you? There's another point to this. First of all, in my whole lifetime, I've never seen a phenomenon like this. But there are people who point out that oftentimes when there's a revolutionary moment for good, that young people who are not yet brutalized and beaten down by the system, who've got the idealism and the optimism to think that changes can be made, things can be better, look to a great mentor, look to a wise leader, look to somebody they can trust and believe in, and it brings about great social change. Is it possible that's happening here?
Let's hope so. And, I've been very encouraged because I have observed, as you have mentioned, that over the years, if you look at the revolutions, I mean, when you look at Tiananmen Square, they weren't the elderly that came out that had been brutalized, as you say, by the communist system. It was the young people. And I think it's also people, whether it's in China or Russia or the United States, they're getting information differently today. So I think we live in very, very special times. And of course, I'm very encouraged by it, but I think it's a natural tendency that has not yet been beaten out of these young people. And I talk about, just growing up. When you're raising a 2-year-old, they're rather independent-minded, but they have to be taught to conform, and a certain amount of that is necessary. Getting the right balance is a big thing. By the time we're into college and others, I felt like I had been misled so many times and didn't like this. But also, people when they're teenagers, are independent-minded, and once again, they're taught that they must conform. So I see this as very exciting. I had a question, believe it or not, from the Main Street media the other night. I actually complimented the interviewer because he says, Dr. Paul, he says, I've noticed, everybody knows about the young people being attracted to your ideas. But he says, lately I've noticed, the audience becoming older, an older generation. And I said, well, I'm glad you noticed because I think the remnant is coming alive, too, the people who had given up, and now they see the young people are excited. So I think we're bringing several generations together, and a true revolution has to do that.
No, and it gives everybody heart, no question. And, of course, it also gives heartburn to the other side. I noticed today that the CPAC, the sort of neoconservative political action committee meeting in Washington every year, is changing their voting system from a paper ballot to electronic voting, as they say, because they think it'll make it much more difficult for you to win their straw poll. Just struck me as an interesting thing. Obviously, electronic voting has many opportunities for bad people, much more so than the old-fashioned paper ballot.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what's going on there, but we chose, not to, direct all the young people to come, this particular year. A bunch of them will still come. I understand Rand is going to speak there. But the energy that we usually put into it hasn't been put there. I'm not speaking there. I hope we still get some support. But the tone was different, and my schedule was different, and it wasn't a strong it wasn't a protest I didn't go. It just happened to be that the amount of energy we put into that the last couple of years was different. So it remains to be seen how it turns out, but certainly we have not, encouraged involvement as we have in the past, and who knows what will come out of it this weekend. I do know that there aren't very many there that will be criticizing the militarism that goes on in the Middle East and getting ready to march into Syria and the last block to the last obstacle to going into Iran. That kind of stuff should scare everybody, and yet so far it hasn't.
I was so interested when the Pew Foundation put out a release, I guess this is a couple of months ago now, about talking to young voters. And one of the questions was, why are you interested in Ron Paul? And they discovered that the key issue that was interesting young people who were supporting you was this question of war and peace. The Pew people were surprised and maybe unpleasantly surprised. I don't know. It's sort of an establishment foundation. This question of war and peace, Hillary Clinton is threatening to march into Syria to overthrow the last secular Arab regime and put so-called Islamic extremists that they're always telling us to worry about otherwise into power. And, of course, as you say, to go after Iran.
The meetings and rallies that we hold, there's a growing number of veterans now because some have been in for 3, 4, 5, 6 years are getting out, and they're more willing to speak out. And so I see more. And, of course, the fundraising has been greater than ever, even 4 years ago or even a year ago, coming from the military, even excelling the commander-in-chief. He's not getting a strong support. But I think this revelation and the willingness of Colonel Daniel Davis to speak out, I think this is going to be significant. I don't know how much trouble he's going to get into, but he's a very credible person, and his revelation about how everybody was misleading the people who go over there. And, you know, and I've never figured it out when the members of Congress go over there, whether they know they're being duped or they want to be duped or just what. They go over there and they're shown around and say, oh, look at all this success. Finally, you get somebody who's very credible. So I'm hoping that he gets a lot of exposure because of his credibility.
Professor Jack Douglas, a sociologist retired from the University of California at San Diego, pointed out the other day that you really can't trust any of the generals. The generals are, of course, entirely political positions. They're appointed by the president or one of the presidents, and they're all politicians. But the lieutenant colonels and the colonels, that's sort of the highest rank you can get to and still be an honest man. And so it was quite something to see this guy also published in an armed forces journal. So it indicates that there is dissent within the military about all the crazy stuff that's going on.
Boy, yeah, I'll tell you. And I think what it's going to do is allow others to speak out, too. And this might be a significant change in events because even this whole thing about getting out of Iraq, and I don't know, it might have been LewRockwell.com that put that map up of those 45 bases surrounding Iran, and everybody's worried about Iran attacking the United States. You know, the absurdity of it all. And that one picture shows so clearly, you know, what's really happening. And I do talk a lot about the military. I don't belittle the military. I don't belittle the responsibility of the federal government for national defense. But I say we have everything inconceivable to defend ourselves. Our problem isn't, you know, adequately defending ourselves. Our problem is restraining our involvement in places where we shouldn't be involved.
Are they going to bomb Iran?
Well, you know, I look a lot at the financial markets, and they're pretty smart. Right now, I would say the financial markets, although oil's been up in the last couple of days, it's been around $100 for a long time. I think if the smart people knew the bombs were about to fall, I think the oil price would be a lot higher. But that doesn't mean that it's not going to happen. I just don't think it's ready. Matter of fact, the other night I was on Wolf Blitzer. If I'm not mistaken, I heard him say a comment right at the end when I was saying that even in Israel there's a debate going on, and sometimes there's more debate in Israel than there is in the United States. And I think he more or less acknowledged that. You're right. He says there is a debate going on in Israel. So I don't think it's sealed yet. But it seems like the noise comes from over here. Those people who are in special positions in the media and those neocons who have such a loud voice. I think that we have a more biased viewpoint than some of what some of the Israelis saying. You know, even Assad said, you know, this is not an existential threat to Israel for them to get a single bomb. And only common sense would tell that, but nobody has even proven that they're on the verge of it. Maybe they're looking at the technology, but so far they haven't been proven one time to have broken the non-proliferation treaty. They have not been charged with that.
As you've pointed out, we seem to be hearing the exact same propaganda in the run-up to the Iraq War. They just substitute Iran for Iraq and recycle all the old propaganda.
Yeah, and, you know, I have some sincere people that I meet along the campaign trail. You know, the old saying, I love what you're doing on the cutting the spending, but don't know about this foreign policy. But as soon as I take a little bit of time and explain to them that, you know, the plan to go into Iraq was laid, and I gave a speech in 1998 warning against the war against Iraq when they decided there had to be regime change. So it had nothing to do with 9/11. Still, people think it has something to do with 9/11. I mean, I imagine it would be sad if still the majority of American people believe this. I do know one thing. There was a poll out in Afghanistan, and you may know the exact number, but I think it was like 80% of the people don't even know what 9/11 is all about. They never heard of the word.
Yes.
They don't even know what happened on 9/11.
Yeah.
So they have no understanding why we're over there, so they're more confused than ever because of that.
Ron, instead of being at CPAC, you're showing the good judgment to be campaigning in Maine. Very exciting what's happening in Maine, isn't it?
Yeah, it sure is. And, there were a couple things that happened over the last 4 years in running this particular campaign where you think where your support is, it might not be as strong as you would expect. And then there'll be support in areas where you're quite surprised about. For instance, Seattle, Washington. We had a lot of support out there. Then Maine, too. I wouldn't have predicted, but even 4 years ago, we had a good reception. This year, we've been up there in the last few weeks, and we'll be there, of course, tomorrow and the next day. The reception's been fantastic. And maybe, Lou, what we should talk about, as Maine goes, so goes the nation. And hopefully hopefully we do well there. Maybe they're going to help lead the charge back to liberty.
And it's interesting, even though Maine has always been seen as a liberal Republican state, when I was a boy and involved in the Republican Party, it was always interesting to me that one of the aspects about Maine Republicanism was they tended not to be quite so militaristic as some other states. So maybe that continues to this day.
Yeah, that'd be great, even though the Northeast was supposed to have been considered more militaristic, I think with the exception of Maine. But the anti-war people were more in the Midwest and Wisconsin, and we have a large support there. But, fortunately for the message that we have, you can find people in every state. It's very well spread out because I think the message is such a powerful message, and we just we're making progress, but we still have a lot of work to do. But it's interesting that you can labor in the vineyards for a long time, but all of a sudden there seems to be an explosion of interest. And one of the things I think is happening is actually the need for something, because people, even those who are on the receiving end of government largesse, are starting to realize, the treasury's really empty. So what's going on here? And maybe we have to change our way, and people are getting tired of the wars. So all of a sudden, and also in addition to this attack on civil liberties, I mean, this whole thing about military arresting American citizens without trial, indefinite imprisonment, and nothing is heard on the national media on this. But, boy, I'll tell you what, I was so surprised, pleasantly so, during the campaign where I would just bring up the National Defense Authorization Act, and they immediately started booing because they knew, and I thought, well, how do you know this stuff? I know you didn't get it on the evening news. So people are aware of this, and in this question they throw out to me, whether it's civil liberties or foreign policy, they said, Ron, you have these good fiscal ideas, but you just have to change your foreign policy. I said, well, that's where most of my support is coming from, personal liberty and a changed foreign policy. So why in the world would I want to change that, besides who would give up the right idea for the wrong idea?
You certainly have shown everybody the presidency is a runaway institution, the whole executive branch. Really, if we were to describe what the president's claimed powers are in terms of starting wars on his own, in terms of, as you say, able to assassinate Americans, imprison them indefinitely and secretly, and torture people and so forth, that would seem much more like a dictatorship than the magistracy that was set up by the Founding Fathers. Yeah,
and I frequently use the word, king. We're not supposed to be elected to be the king, and yet it seems like that's what some of these other candidates want to be. They assume that's their responsibility, is to be the king, and too many people, want to be taken care of. But my simple explanation is that I don't have the authority. I wouldn't have the authority. I don't have the desire, and it wouldn't work. And that is to run the world, to tell you how to run your life, or to tell people how to spend their money. I mean, the president's supposed to be there to protect those things, not to tell people how to live.
Ron, if we were to make a list of the achievements of your campaigns no show would be able to handle that, but I do just want to mention one. What about the fact that you single-handedly, in your congressional career and especially in these two political campaigns, have made the Federal Reserve a powerful, popular issue, an issue that, nobody could get in. I mean, I know I failed to get anybody interested in the Fed. You've made this an issue to the extent that the Fed is afraid of you. Bernanke's afraid of what you're doing, and they don't like themselves being discussed this way. They don't like them being criticized, all their bailouts of Europe and the big banks and so forth. Isn't that by itself just an extraordinary thing that this is so rare that the money issue is back, full blown?
And I see that more of an academic issue than a political issue, but the two come together because it is the academic issue of challenging the status quo of the monetary system and Keynesian economics, the explanation of the business cycle. And this is where the young people are really responding. The other day I was asked to comment on Bernanke's challenge that, yes, we should cut, but don't do it too much. Be very, very cautious, And they asked me about that, and I said, yeah, why would you resort to looking at him? What did he say, when the NASDAQ bubble was formed? What did he say in 2006 when the housing bubble was there and he was taking over? I said, I don't know whether he has credibility and using him as an expert. Hope that wasn't too nasty.
No, that was great. I saw that interview. But the fact that you've got young people talking about this, talking about the war issue, talking about civil liberties, not only in this country, I hear from people all over the world that you're tremendously popular with young people in Brazil, every place from Brazil to Turkey to England to Spain to Latin America too, and to Asia. This is a worldwide intellectual revolution, peaceful revolution that you're leading. Well,
let's hope it's more than just me. There's been a lot of work done by a lot of people, and I think that the time is right, for these ideas, because not only is the country and the world bankrupt, but the philosophy is bankrupt, and something has to give. In the last century, we saw the total destruction and discrediting of ruthless communism, and that's past us. But even then, I was happy to see that, but I was afraid we would usher in an age where interventionism and inflationism would grab hold, and they've been in charge ever since. But I think as Mises predicted, he says this is a non-viable system too. He was pretty pessimistic when he says, well, it'll probably go to more of a ruthless fascism, but let's hope we can influence the future by saying, yes, this is coming to an end, but we don't have to end up with fascism, but we could end up with something much better if we build on what we've had in the past. And I always dislike when they say, oh, you guys just want to go back to the old age, back to, lived like 200 years ago, but actually these ideas are very, very new, so we have to build on them and renew our interest, and that's why I'm so excited about what the young people are doing and thinking about these days.
Well, Dr. Ron Paul, thanks for taking time to come on the show, and we're all rooting for you.
Thanks a lot, Lew.
Bye-bye. Well, thanks so much for listening to the Lew Rockwell Show today. Take a look at all the podcasts. There have been hundreds of them. There's a link on the upper right-hand corner of the LRC front page. Thank you.